Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. In this video I'm looking at the battles of Thermopylae and Salamis as part of my series on ancient history, in particular looking at the relations between Greek and non-Greek states between 492 and 404 BC. So this part is part of the look at the Persian invasion, so we're looking at the Persian Wars, and these are two very significant battles, both of which are part of the story of the failure of Xerxes' attempts to conquer Greece. This is designed for my A-level ancient history students, and we're studying OCR ancient history, and from the specification it tells us at this particular point in time we need to look at the involvement in Greek states in the events of 480 to 479 BC, including examples of medising, cooperation and conflict, debates and differences of opinion between Salamis and Plataea on strategy. Well, this video I'm going to concentrate on Thermopylae and Salamis. There will be another video looking at Plataea and Mikhail, in which I'll finish this stuff off. I just decided there was a little bit too much for just one video. So to start off with, we're going to look at the Battle of Thermopylae. What I'm going to do with the battles, I'm going to give a brief overview, and then I'm going to look at it in a bit more detail using aspects of Herodotus. So the Battle of Thermopylae has been made famous by the film The 300. 300 allegedly is the number of Spartan soldiers who stood firm against this enormous Persian army, and it's a story essentially of glorious sacrifice by Leonidas and his Spartan men. The Greeks had withdrawn 10,000 men from Thessaly, as the Thessalians had gone over to Persia before the battle. So as an example of medising. The Hellenic League met and decided to meet the Persians at the narrow pass at Thermopylae. The Greek fleet was stationed to stop the Persians landing behind the Greek lines at Thermopylae, so the idea would be a bottleneck and they could hold them there. There was an inconclusive naval engagement, but it did help hold off the Persians getting round the back of the Spartans and their allies at Thermopylae. There's an argument about strategies in Herodotus book 7.219 about whether to stand and fight or return to their cities. About 7,000 men, most of them left before the final day, before the battle. They were sent away by Leonidas, the Spartan king. And the Spartans stay, as do about 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans. They fight very bravely. Again, the battle lasts for 3 days, and they block the Persian advance. And it's said in the sources that it kind of strikes fear into the Persian hearts about how difficult the Spartans in particular were to defeat, despite their low number. I mean, a lot of this is helped by the fact it's a narrow pass, that they're fighting the hoplites in a phalanx, which is very difficult to beat. There's been prophecy before this point, saying that essentially one of two things will happen: either Sparta will fall, or a Spartan king will die. And in this, we can see kind of the bravery of Leonidas in the context of Greek belief at the time, and that he ensures the prophecy comes to pass, but that in coming to pass, Sparta is saved, and then Spartans will go on fighting, believing that Sparta is safe. Now, if we look at in terms of what Herodotus tells us, he tells us about a former Spartan king who'd been deposed in 491, aiding the Persians, and that he warns Xerxes of Spartan courage. And we see differences of opinion about the Hellenic League in 7.219. Those from the Peloponnese wanted to withdraw. The rest didn't. The Ukrainians and the Phoenicians, in particular, kind of going, well, if we withdraw to the Peloponnese, our cities will be destroyed. And we see this in 7.207. And as I mentioned, the Delphic oracles made a prophecy that either the city would be laid to waste or a Spartan king would die. This is in 7.220. Leonidas decides that he would fulfill the prophecy, and in doing so, he believed he would save Sparta. Now, the divisions in the Spartans about going and who should go Herodotus believes that they are dismissed rather than deserting without orders. So, although there was talk of panic, that essentially what had happened was that the Greek army disbands largely because Leonidas tells them to do, and this ensures, in the words of Herodotus, that Leonidas and the remaining Spartans would receive a treasure of fame in which no other city would share. So again, maybe slight odd reasons for doing it, but hugely brave nonetheless. The leadership of Leonidas is one of the prime examples of strong, selfless leadership amongst the Greeks. He shows concern for the fate of others, for example, Medising, who foretold the doom of the Greek army and had told Leonidas. Leonidas then gave him permission to leave. Now he doesn't. He chooses not to leave. Instead, he sends his only son away from the battle. But he, despite having foretold the doom of the army, stays with Leonidas and fights alongside him. This is shown as an example of Leonidas and others putting their own safety kind of not at the forefront. They think of others rather than themselves. So this is kind of an example of selfless leadership by Leonidas. He's told about the fate of the army, but stays and fights, and then even the guy who tells him about the fate of the army stays and fights alongside him, but does send away his son. There's interesting things in Herodotus in terms of the treatment of those who fought alongside Sparta. Now, the Thebans, he tells, fought bravely, but he claimed they were fighting against their will. And there's a potential example here of a kind of anti-Theban, pro-Athenian viewpoint. Again, because of his leanings towards Athens, that might put him against Thebes, which is one of the enemies of Athens. And you can contrast that to the way that he treats the Thespians. So there's no suggesting that Thespians are fighting against their wills. So it would seem odd, despite everybody else being sent away, that the Spartans would have kept the Thebans to fight against their will. Again, it doesn't quite add up. Obviously, we don't really have a huge way of double-checking Herodotus on this. So our second battle, again, it follows on from this. So they've been held up at Thermopylae. But the Persian army is rattling through large parts of Greece, and one of the great hopes for Greece really is to take on the might of Persia on the water, on the sea. So the Greek naval force gathers together under the Spartan Eurybates, and they moor off Salamis, and they have a council of war. In the meantime, Artemisia, who was the Greek queen of Halicarnassus, was acting as an advisor to Xerxes, who was and she was fighting on the Persian side. Interestingly, obviously, Halicarnassus is where Herodotus is from. So whether he has this greater insight into what Artemisia was doing and saying, but again, she's a very important character in the Battle of Salamis. We're also told that the Phoenicians had joined the Persian fleet. Athens was being burnt by the Persians at this point, so Athens had been abandoned and was being destroyed, set on fire. One of the main aims of Xerxes in his war. There's the debate at Salamis, this council of war. Now, do they fight at Salamis, which is close to Athens, or do they retreat to the Peloponnese? Themistocles emerges as a key figure, arguing for them to fight at Salamis, and he is opposed by Didymantus, who is a Corinthian commander. Themistocles wins the debate, having threatened to withdraw the Athenian ships and head to Italy. Now the Spartans, who particularly concerned that Athens might abandon them. That's particularly important because such a high percentage or high number of the 120 ships were Athenian. I think 40 of the 127 ships were Athenian. So again, generally you would expect Athenian leadership on the water. It told at the beginning of the battle that the Corinthians panic and start to flee, but then rejoin the battle. The Greeks win the battle, the Persians then discuss what to do next, and we're told of discussions between Mardonius and Xerxes and Artemisia. The outcome of this is that the Macedonian king Alexander, not Alexander the Great, different Macedonian king called Alexander, kind of approach Athens with an offer which the Athenians then turn down. The Spartans are worried that they won't, but Athens says we essentially will fight on. So Salamis is different to Thermopylae. At Thermopylae, the Greeks lose. Now, it's a glorious defeat, but it is still a defeat. Salamis is different. At Salamis, they actually win. Now, so if we look at the details from Herodotus in more detail, so the navy is 127 ships, made up from numerous states, but Athens is by far and away the biggest, with 40 ships. I think Corinth is the second biggest with 20, and we can find this in book 8.1. Herodotus suggests the Athenians stepped aside from leading the navy at Salamis to allow Sparta to lead, and then it's a lovely quote in there from him, knowing that a quarrel about command would certainly mean the destruction of Greece. Again, this is a really good kind of nice example of the pro-Athenian line that Herodotus takes, and he's presenting in 8.1 to 8.3 this idea that the Athenians place the interest of Greece above their own. So rather than going for their own glory, that they are concerned about the fate of the whole of Greece. Even in the great defeat at Thermopylae, there's this hint that the Spartans are particularly hung up on their individual glory, and we saw that with what happened there. They didn't want to share that glory really, but the Athenians, they're not worried about the glory. They don't want to necessarily lead if that's going to cause problems. A lot of the Peloponnesian commanders are in favour of sailing to Isthmus to defend the Peloponnese and kind of withdrawing from Salamis, which is going to kind of abandon this entire area of Greece around Attica to the Persians. Now the Persians had entered Attica and were laying waste to it. Thespia and Plataea had both been destroyed for refusing to submit. Now the Thespians we heard fighting bravely alongside the Spartans at the Thermopylae. Plataeans we saw fighting alongside the Athenians at Marathon, and the Plataeans again had contributed quite large numbers to help with the navy at Salamis. So Greece is in real peril. Again, this is 8.50. Moving on, we've then got news arriving to the men at Salamis that essentially Athens had been destroyed. This is in 8.56. 8.57, 8.58. The Athenians, an Athenian hearing the plan to sail to Isthmus, proclaimed that if it happened, all would be lost. That Greece would be lost. He tells this to Themistocles. Themistocles agrees with him and takes up his argument. And goes and speaks to the Spartan commander and says, look, we need to revisit the decision. This isn't the right thing to do. 8.59 to 8.61, Themistocles and the Corinthian commander clash whether to strike against Persia at Salamis or to withdraw to Isthmus. Themistocles makes an impassioned speech how they must stand and fight to save Greece. He states the narrow waters at Salamis will give the Greeks an advantage, whilst on the open waters they got no chance. He says it's better to defend the Peloponnese at Salamis rather than actually drawing the Persians to Isthmus and therefore actually drawing them to the Peloponnese. And we also hear him saying that essentially there are women and children at Salamis, and they can only save them by defeating the Persians there. The Corinthians, again, the Corinthian commander attacks Themistocles, calling him a man without a country, as Athens has fallen. It has just been taken and destroyed by the Persians. Again, a particularly cruel argument, a cruel point to make in the argument by the Corinthians. And again, we can see in this, again, maybe Herodotus he's trying to make Corinth look bad and Athens look good in this, but again, we don't really have any way of checking. We know that Themistocles' arguments wins, and they fight at Salamis. We know there is the battle there. The exact details of this we can't absolutely double check, but it is potentially what happened. But it's interesting the way that it's slanted, I think. Now, Themistocles wins the argument, but he kind of, again, we've seen the level of kind of animosity within the Greeks kind of rising during the debate. So we've got the Corinthians kind of going, "Oh, you're a man without a country because Athens is destroyed," and we've got Themistocles saying, "Right, okay, we fight here or we're going." Essentially, he says we will sail and we will settle in Italy. Now, again, this idea that there's been fated that Athens will settle in Sicily is kind of something that will come back at the end of the Peloponnesian War and kind of cause a massive issue. But that's the threat that they made. Now Athens has been destroyed, so the Athenian people might get on their boats and go. The threat of the Athenians to leave, again, remember 40 of the 127 boats, they're the most renowned for their naval warfare amongst the Greek states, convinces Eurybates, the Spartan in charge, that the navy must stay and fight at Salamis. As I said, we've got this interesting play between in the speeches that's in between Corinth and Athens, and Athens comes out as kind of brave and noble, and Corinth comes out as being kind of unpleasant and cowardly. It's worth noting that the time that Herodotus is writing was an enemy of Athens. In 894, he suggests that the Corinthians looked to flee at the start of the battle, but in a rather typically strange Herodotus-y incident, they rejoined the battle having encountered a strange boat, and on that strange boat there were people prophesying Greek victory and even offering to go along and be sacrificed or killed by the Corinthians if they proved to be wrong. This convinces the Corinthians to rejoin the battle, and the Greeks win. Now, to Herodotus' credit, he does say, and this is quite, again, a key thing when you're evaluating and looking at the reliability of Herodotus, he does say this is the Athenian version of what happens, and the others say that this is false. So there is this, again, typically kind of slightly strange prophetic example of this strange boat telling the Corinthians what's going to happen, and then them listening to that prophecy and everything working out okay. He does, again, point out it's an Athenian point of view. We're told in 8.100 that the defeat at Salamis leads to the Persians abandoning Athens, and Mardonius going and talking to Xerxes about potential ways of taking Greece, including giving himself a 300,000 man army, and he would carry on the conquest on Xerxes' behalf. In 8.101 and 8.102, Artemisia again advises Xerxes, this is the Queen of Halicarnassus, and she says, "You'll give Mardonius his 300,000 men and leave him to fight against the Greeks, whilst Xerxes should return home himself." And again, she says it's kind of a win-win situation. If Mardonius succeeds, then all the better. If he fails, then it's no slight on Xerxes, and the Mardonius is merely a slave, and therefore, even if he fights and dies, it's of no real consequence. And that Xerxes has achieved what he wants to do, which his aim was to go and punish Athens. He's burnt Athens to the ground. He's done what he set out to do. So no one could hold it against Xerxes if he went back. In 8.103, Herodotus suggests that Xerxes feared the Greeks, and that's why he had returned home, thus emphasising the significance of both Thermopylae and Salamis in the defeat of Xerxes and the Persians. In 8.143 and 8.144, Athens tells Sparta that they will never desert the Greek cause, and they refuse very favourable terms offered to them by the Persians via the Macedonian king. Again, don't get this Alexander confused with the Alexander that we study later on in the bit on the Macedonians. This is an earlier Alexander, not Alexander the Great. So in this, again, Athens comes out smelling of roses. Unsurprisingly, that it has it has seen off the Persians. And although there is kind of theoretically Spartan leadership at Salamis, really the great hero of Salamis, if you go all the way through all the different bits of Herodotus, and there's far more on this in Herodotus than I've looked at, then the great hero of Salamis is Themistocles, and the whole reason why the Greeks fight at Salamis is Themistocles, and so the Athenians are kind of the heroes. The kind of defeated are the Persians, and kind of almost like the villains on the Greek side of the Corinthians. So again, all quite convenient if you're telling a story from a pro-Athenian point of view. Right, the spec, as I said earlier, asks for examples of the following bits. So some of this is repetitive of the other stuff we've looked at, and some of it's just the bits I've added in. So it asks for examples of medising. Well, we're told in 7.151 that Argos were the friends of Persia, and there's a suggestion that the Argives had invited Persia to invade Greece because their fight against the Spartans was going badly. We're told of Thessaly going over to the Persians before the Battle of Thermopylae, and that's one of the reasons why that area had to be abandoned. Artemisia is the Greek queen of Halicarnassus, who's advising Xerxes and fighting on the Persian side. And then right at the end we see Macedonia acting on Persians' behalf in negotiations with Athens in 8.143, 8.144. So there clearly are Greeks on the Persian side. So medising is an important part of the story at this stage. It asks for examples of cooperation, and I've interpreted this as cooperation between Greek states, because medising would be cooperation between Persia and Greek states. So at Thermopylae we see the Thespians and the Thebans fighting alongside the Spartans. So you might argue that the Thebans, according to Herodotus, weren't doing so willingly. At Salamis we see Herodotus telling how the Athenians stepped aside to allow Sparta to lead, to avoid to avoid kind of division, and we'll talk about that a bit more in division bit. At Salamis there's 127 ships, and including ships and men from Athens, Plataea, Corinth, Megara, Scion, Sparta, Epidaurus, Eretria, Troezen, Scyra, Chios, and Opus. This is Herodotus 8.1. There's a list of how many ships from each one, and whether it was just men, etc. But that's a lot of Greek states. So this idea, this shows this really is at Salamis a proper example of cooperation amongst many states. In 8.143, 8.144, I think it's a really helpful couple of little sections of Herodotus. The Athenians refused Persian terms after Salamis and promised to stand by the rest of Greece and fight till the very last man against the Persians. So this suggests a degree of Greek unity and cooperation. There are, however, examples of conflict within the Greeks. Again, I've interpreted this to be within the Greeks because I think, well, conflict between the Persians and the Greeks kind of goes without saying. That's what the battles are about. But the conflict within the Greeks, so in 7.152 we got the suggestion that the Argives were friends of Persia, invited Xerxes to invade because the war with Sparta was going badly. At Salamis in Herodotus 8.3, Herodotus warns at terrible consequences of any internal conflict during the war, and actually talks about future strife between Athens and Sparta when they fall out once the fighting gets to Persia, once they fall out over who's going to lead. And again, at this very kind of important moment, as the kind of Persians are already in Greece, kind of further division at this point would be disastrous. But it shows this idea of division is always there. And then the bit we've talked about at Salamis 8.50 to 8.61, the Athenian Themistocles clashes with the Corinthian commander, and he threatens to remove the Athenian fleet and head for Italy. So although we see very grand words, so lots of other points from Athens about how it will never abandon Greece and fight to the death, then there is a bit where if they aren't going to get their own way, they're essentially going to take their bat and ball home. So again, lots of important bits in there where you can pick on these different themes. And remember, when you are using in an essay or any other question on the exam, you are expected to not only be able to use the ancient sources, but also to evaluate them. So AO3, again, in a 30-mark essay, it's 15 of the 30 marks. You need to be closely referring to what the ancient sources tell us, and then you must be expanding on it and evaluating how accurate that is, how reliable that is, what kind of issues or problems there might be with it, what strengths there might be with it. So it might be that we're talking about the queen of Helicarnassus. Herodotus is from Helicarnassus. Maybe he's got a degree of kind of better insight and depth that he can find on this. We've seen all the bits where kind of Athens comes out really well in a lot of this. Even at the point he admits that it's the Athenian point of view. Corinth comes out badly. Thebes comes out badly. So again, is this something we need to be cautious with? Again, Herodotus is our major source. There isn't really a huge amount of other things we can go to double check it. Most historians largely believe it to be accurate, but at those points they kind of go, right, this is something we need to be cautious with, and that's the kind of route your evaluation should take. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that's been helpful. And again, I will be adding more videos on this as we go through, looking in particular at Plataea and the other battles at this point immediately, and then moving further through with the events in the Persian War, but also going on to the Peloponnesian War. Thank you very much for watching.